Well, the city's first tree ordinance took place back in 1957, and it established a 5-member tree commission at that time, and it set up rules to trim trees on city property. And there was no fee, but it required a permit for a private entity that was seeking to remove, planting or trimming trees on city property. At that time, it made it the duty of the private property owners to remove dead or dangerous trees that were over public sidewalks. And this was all the way back in 1957. And no permit was required at that time to remove trees on private property. Next, we go to the most current ordinance that was adopted in 2007. Ordinance 272407. It requires a permit for removal of a tree with a 9-inch diameter or greater. These are shade trees, and exempt trees are specified in the ordinance that do not require tree removal permit, like palm trees, citrus trees, things like that. And it does include all tree removal on private property and addresses right-of-way trimming also in the ordinance. What it does do differently from the previous ordinances is it establishes 3 different tiers, different types of protected trees. You have your basic protected tree, which is any tree, any shade tree, which is 9 inches in diameter up to just under 24 inches in diameter at the breast height. And next to that, you'll see these ratios next to it. We'll get more into that. The ratios deal with the amount of compensation for removal of any of those three types of trees. If it was just a regular protected tree between 9 inches and 24 inches, then the compensation ratio was 1 inch for 1 inch. You'd have to pay for compensation in a 1-to-1 ratio. Next, we have specimen trees. Those are trees that are 24 inches to just under 36 inches in diameter. And the ratio for compensating for those is a 2-to-1 ratio. Again, we'll get into the specifics of that in just a minute. And then another new category was created for much larger trees that was designated historic trees that are 36 inches in diameter or larger. And for the removal of a healthy historic tree, the compensation is 3-to-1. In other words, right now we have a compensation amount. If you pay compensation instead of replanting trees of $110 per inch. So for example, if you have a protected tree and it's allowed to be removed, it meets the criteria, and it's fairly healthy, and it's in an area that has to be removed and it's permissible, then the compensation is $110 per inch. For a specimen tree, it's $220 per inch, and for a historic tree, it's $330 per inch in diameter.
Stuart, this is just healthy trees, though. We're not talking about sick trees. That's what you.
Correct. Right, and there is,
that, yeah.
correct, and we'll cover that also. This permits also, there's provisions there when projects go before our planning and zoning board and city commission. Oftentimes there's, and these are usually commercial projects, there's tree surveys, and there's often trees that have to be removed through that process, and it permits planning and zoning board and city commission to approve those type of removals. Appeals of permit denials, again, they go to the tree preservation board and the city commission. The tree preservation board has representatives from 3 different city boards. There's a representative from the Parks and Recreation Board, there's a representative from the Board of Adjustments, and there's a representative from the Planning and Zoning Board. In addition to those 3 members, there are 4 other appointed members that compose a total membership of 7, and then there's also an alternate member. This also created a tree banking program that allows property owners or applicants to plant trees on their property for future compensation prior to an anticipated need to remove a protected tree. If somebody wants to plant trees and maybe they're anticipating a room addition on the rear of their home and there's a tree that ultimately may need to be removed and they're not planning to do that for quite some time, then they could plant other trees and that they need to register through us so they have it on record, and the inches of trees that they plant is recognized toward the future removal of that when that comes about. This may be difficult to read, but I'll go through some of it. There's also handouts on this comparison here, and this compares the compensation requirements of the current ordinance with the proposed ordinance. As I've already mentioned, under the current ordinance, depending on whether you have a protected tree, a regular protected tree, a specimen tree, or a historic tree, there's a increasingly greater ratio of compensation. And that compensation can either be by paying into the tree replacement fund or by planting back inches of tree. So that's the way it is in the current ordinance. If you have a tree, we've created this category less than 19 inches, but that's a regular protected tree, then it's a 1-to-1 ratio under the current ordinance. Under the proposed ordinance, it is greatly reducing the compensation and simplifying it by saying that if you remove a protected tree, you're allowed to remove it, then you only have to plant back 1 3-inch tree, or you can still, if you absolutely don't have room to plant a tree or want to plant a tree, you can still pay compensation at $110 per inch. The other category listed here is 19 to 23 inches. Please note that both of these categories, where it says less than 19 inches and 19 to 23 inches, all of those inches are just a regular protected tree. But in the proposed ordinance, there is a greater replanting requirement for trees that are over 19 inches, and that replanting requirement is 2 3-inch trees. Or again, you could pay $110 per inch into the tree replacement fund. Going to a specimen tree, current ordinance, you have to pay twice the diameter in inches, or replant twice the diameter in inches. Under the proposed ordinance, you would have to plant 4 3-inch trees, or 2 3-inch trees and a 4.5-inch tree. Or you could still pay compensation at the ratio of $110 per inch. And then going on to the historic tree, current ordinance is a 3-to-1 ratio. In the proposed ordinance, you would have to plant back 2 4.5-inch trees or pay compensation at $110 per inch. So you can see the compensation has been reduced in the proposed ordinance so that it's for all levels of protected tree, specimen, and historic, it's $110 per inch as far as the financial compensation. Now, one important item is in the proposed ordinance, there is no change for 95% of the ordinance. Most of the ordinance that has the same criteria for removal of trees that's in the current ordinance, and most of the major changes are to the compensation area. So a tree that cannot be removed under the current ordinance could not be removed under proposed ordinance. If it's a healthy tree and not in the way of right in the middle of the property or preventing building a house that's obvious that it's be impossible to or a major addition, without removal of that tree, then we could deny the permit under either scenario. I did another set of examples by giving an exact inches of diameter, and this is analogous with what we just went through, but this gives a sample tree that's, say, a 9-inch tree. Under the current ordinance, you either replant 9 inches or you pay $990 for that removal of that protected tree. In the proposed ordinance, you would replant one 3-inch tree or pay the $990. If it's a protected tree that's 20 inches in diameter, then under the current ordinance, you would either have to replant 20 inches or pay $2,200. Under the proposed ordinance, you would plant back 2 3-inch trees or pay $2,200. And then going up to specimen and historic trees, you can see the compensation is quite different here for the current proposed ordinance. Under a specimen tree, for a 30-inch tree, you have to pay twice the inches in diameter, 60 inches, which is $6,600, or replant 60 inches. Under the proposed ordinance, you plant 3 3-inch trees, 4 3-inch trees, or 2 3-inch trees and 1 4.5-inch tree, or pay the compensation of $3,300. And then going out to historic, you can see it goes, on the current ordinance, it's 3 times the inches in diameter, which is 50. So you'd have to pay, replant 150 inches or pay $16,500. Under the proposed ordinance, you would plant back 2 4.5-inch trees or pay $5,500. Now, there's an extremely important point here that I cannot emphasize. When you're looking at a historic tree, I can only think of, we have never issued a permit to remove a historic tree. If it's a healthy tree, then it's not, and there has been appeal of us denial of issuance of a historic tree, and they've gone on to the city commission, and the city commission has granted that removal. But from a staff level, Alan, unless you can think of one off the top of your head, if it's a healthy historic tree under the current ordinance or under the proposed ordinance, if it doesn't meet the criteria, then it's. So when you see these drastic differences, I'm not sure that it matters much because we're not allowing removal. Yes, sir.
Has anyone ever cut down a historic tree without a permit or without telling anyone?
Could you repeat the question?
Has anyone ever cut down a historic tree without, to our knowledge, without permit? You think there are some cases? There was one. Okay. And we took it to the board. Okay. The penalty, by the way, for tree removal without a permit is that the code enforcement board is empowered to, first of all, impose an immediate $5,000 fine, in addition to the compensation requirement, which is it double or after the fact? Or is the compensation is double on top of that? So if it's a substantial tree and we have the tree trunk and the diameter, then it is a substantial compensation and fine.